It was actually quite simple. Once I got the evidence, I suspected my second wife of something I couldn't understand. You know the feeling when something's wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on what it might be. I've always felt that it's some subconscious part of your brain that collects and analyzes random facts until it finds a pattern and then tries to tell your functional part that something is wrong. Researchers have discussed these things endlessly, citing premonitions and female intuition as examples. I had 4 children with my first wife, all good people with successful careers and stable families. They helped me a lot at times. When their mother died, we clung to each other like survivors of an airplane crash, becoming even closer. By the time I married Ellen, they were all married or in college. She was almost 11 years younger, but we seemed to fit together. She had the same values, the same goals, and she was hot in bed. She wasn't beautiful, but she was very attractive. Smoky eyes, so brown they seemed almost black, and a mane of brown hair that fell to her shoulders. She exercised twice as hard and loved compliments. My children accepted her, made an effort to get along, but never really bonded. They were all adults, and if they didn't love her, they didn't hate her. And as long as I was happy, they were happy. We had been married about 6 years when I got this itch, this prickly feeling that something was wrong. I was 55 at the time, she was 46. I caught her in a few little lies, nothing serious until you put them all together. Eventually, I couldn't shake the anxiety, so I went to the older woman. Melody was an attractive woman of 35, with an accountant husband and 2 girls who liked to see their grandfather. She looked like an accountant, too. But looks can be deceiving. And that fact kept her busy and added to their bank account. Mel owned one of the most successful private detective firms in the Southeast. She had 2 degrees, one in computers and one in psychology. She was a walking lie detector, analyzing body language and voice intonation almost unconsciously. It was very hard to surprise her. She had 5 offices and as many techno-scientists as detectives. One of her tricks was to hire older ex-cops, both men and women, and young geeky kids. Who notices a geek with a laptop or a grandmother out for her morning walk? Not so much, judging by her bank account. I gave her money to start her own business, part of the insurance money I got when her mother died. She tried several times to pay me back, but gave up when I threatened that I would never attend another family function with her again if she didn't give it up. She didn't seem shocked when I voiced my concerns. No platitudes of, "It's probably nothing," or "Maybe it's just your imagination." Just a simple, "I'll look into it." She did this for 2 weeks before she asked me to stop by her office on my way home. I had an office downtown, right next to her office. I was a terrible consultant, the guy you hire to tell you how to save your company. The sad part of my business is most of the time I tell them what they already knew. They just needed someone they paid an obscene amount of money to appease. Sometimes part of my responsibility was to be the man with the axe. I didn't like it, but most of the people I let go needed to be fired, and I knew it. Others were completely surprised. She tossed the folder on the desk when I walked in. Our neighbor, a 34-year-old married father of 2. He was unemployed and spent his time while his wife worked and his children were in school, relieving my wife's tensions by holding all sorts of jobs in all sorts of places. Pictures of him and her on my couch, the washing machine, our dining room table, his chair, his backyard, even one of him kneeling in front of the baby swing while my dear wife sat on the swing. Hell, what did he have against beds? Mel watched me carefully, knowing me well. "Don't do anything stupid, Dad. Just leave her and live your life. She can't take anything away from you. The prenup takes care of that. I know you. I inherited my cunning mind from you. If you think of something, don't do it." It was too late, but I thanked her for the advice. She looked me in the eye and picked up the phone. "I'm calling Junior. He needs to know anyway. After all, he's your lawyer. Maybe he can talk you out of what you're up to." That brings me to my oldest son's den. Mel sent me some pictures. I've already started the paperwork. You need to stay calm and let me handle this. Please, Dad. "Okay," I said calmly. "When can you do it?" "It's Tuesday. I'll apply tomorrow, do a couple of favors, and on Friday she'll be served whenever and wherever you want. You're going home?" "Yeah, I think I'll be on my best behavior for 2 days. She hasn't been paying much attention to me lately. She'll never notice anything." He stood up when I was about to leave and put his hand on my shoulder. "Don't do that, Dad. Do what? Whatever you're up to. I can see it in your eyes. I assured him I wasn't going to do anything stupid. I found out later that I wasn't in the car before he called his friend, one of the most successful defense attorneys in the state. Dave, keep your schedule flexible. I may have to use you soon. I was right. She hadn't noticed anything. I had a few days off between assignments, so I decided to stop by to see my youngest son. He was sitting in the back, but when he heard the bell ring, he came out grinning. Hey, Dad, what's up? Before you answer me, I already know. Junior and Mel called me last night. I figured you'd stop by. What can I do for you? He was my wild child, covered in tattoos and piercings. 3A his whole life, he never got in trouble. He inherited his mother's wicked sense of humor and my sense of right and wrong. He could have studied whatever he wanted in college, but he took his lifelong fascination with guns and turned it into a very profitable business. I did for him what I did for my other children and gave him startup money. He was a master gunsmith with an almost cult-like following. He specialized in SWAT team weapons, customizing and cheating their guns. He guaranteed their sniper rifles a range of 350 yards. You could cover the first 3 shots with a quarter, the next 3 with a 50-cent coin. If you could hold it steady, you could hit it. He did all the work for the 3 major cities around here, as well as most of the work for the local SBO and FBI. He also had a very profitable gun store and police equipment supply line. Thanks to him, I had a lot of guns, and the family often shot together on a 20-acre lot I owned, far out in the county, which we turned into a shooting range. He took aim at all his guns. He was married, which I thought would never happen. She owned her own tattoo parlor, was very talented, and her work was regularly featured in magazines. It was love at first sight. I liked her a lot. I picked up a few new items he showed me, never knowing when they might come in handy. On the way home, I got a call from my youngest daughter, a nurse practitioner and partner in office. I heard, Dad. Are you all right? Do you need anything? You're not going to do anything stupid, are you? I smiled. I could see her frowning at the phone, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Don't worry, babe. You think I'm going to screw up and miss the birth of my new grandson? Not a chance. I could use a few sleeping pills. I haven't been able to sleep the last few days. I got the prescription from her right after her mother died. I couldn't sleep from grief. It didn't take long for them to kick in. They were very strong. Over the years, especially if I was working with a business that I knew was not going to work out, I was stressed out. She would only prescribe medication for a week, sometimes just giving me samples. After giving me another warning, she promised to call the pharmacy to fill the prescription. Thursday night, I sat down to a nice dinner with my wife. We had a pleasant conversation. If I didn't already know better, it would have been hard to believe what she was doing. I opened a bottle of wine from a local vineyard that I knew she loved. I'd picked it up that afternoon. I poured her a glass as we relaxed after our meal. I didn't like wine, and she knew it well, so she wasn't surprised when I opened a beer. When her glass was empty, I poured her another and took another beer. About halfway through the second glass, she nodded. I took the glass from her hands. You look sleepy, honey. Why don't you lie down on the couch and relax? I'll put on some music and clean up the kitchen. She mumbled something like, thank you, and snored. I cleaned up the kitchen and made 2 phone calls. Now was all that was said in the first one. The second one took a little longer. Sandy, how are you? I'm good. Did Barry find a job yet? Well, I might have something for him. I'm meeting this guy at his plant to observe his capabilities on the second shift. Why don't he come and ride along with me? He really needs a night operations manager. Salary's in the 40s. You think he'd be interested? All right. Have him here in about 30 minutes. I made a mental note to dump the phone as soon as possible and went outside to wait. I had a mid-90s GMC truck that I hardly ever drove. It came with a thin awning, which I immediately removed. What good is a truck if you can't use it to haul stuff? Earlier that day, I put it back on. A few minutes later, Barry came over. He thanked me for my help, talked about how much he liked my wife and me. Not a problem, Barry. What are neighbors for? Before we go, could you see if I got the bolts on this thing right? My car is in the store, and she hates it when I drive her car. I'd hate for this thing to fly off when we hit the road. I raised the trunk lid and lowered the trunk lid. He leaned over to check the bolts when I hit him with the stun gun. He shuddered, let out a sigh, and went out like a light. I pushed him inside, closed the back door and lid, and got out. I drove for about 5 minutes before turning off to a secluded spot. He was just coming to when I hit him again, this time taking the opportunity to cuff his hands and shackle his feet. I drove to our firing range. It took about 30 minutes, 10 minutes on a dirt road so desolate it looked like a goat trail. I must have been going too fast, bumped a little hard with a few jolts. Must have been my anger. I unlocked the gate and drove inside. As I locked it again, I heard him yelling and stomping inside. I made a mental note to grab a gag on the way back. I popped out to the firing range. Damn, I never realized how rough the road was, but then again, I'd never driven that fast before. He started screaming as soon as I opened the back door. I grabbed him by the leg straps and pulled him outside. He made a thud as he hit the ground. He opened his mouth to complain, and I shoved the muzzle of my Judge into it. In case you don't know, a Judge is a revolver capable of firing 45 or 410 rounds from a shotgun. He went silent. Listen to me, asshole. I'm going to let you go. You're going to walk over to that bench and sit your ass on it. Don't move. Don't talk until you're told to. Do you understand? He nodded his head as far as he could with the barrel in his mouth. I might have broken a tooth when I pulled it out, but I wasn't sure. If I had, he wouldn't have complained. He couldn't keep his balance, and I lost patience, so I made him crawl up, with a little encouragement in the form of kicking him in the butt every now and then. I also verbally encouraged him. This is a Judge's revolver, just so you know. I have it loaded with 4 10-round shotgun shells. It's about the same size, maybe a little bigger than a BB. It won't kill you unless I hit you properly, but it will hurt like hell. If I empty it into you, you'll bleed out, even if I don't hit anything serious. Are you with me here, Barry? He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I sat him down on the bench and tied him down with 36-inch zipper ties, immobilizing him. He tried to scream, but I put a gag in his mouth and tightened it. I got it from my sister-in-law. She sold sex toys as a byproduct for her tattoo business. It led to many interesting dinner conversations, and my daughters and daughters-in-law and a few select friends would get together every 3 or 4 months to see the latest merchandise. It always led to some very happy husbands. I pulled up a camp chair and sat down in front of it. In the light of the full moon, I could see the traces of his tears. Do you know why we're here, Barry? He shook his head negatively. Come on, Barry. You're smarter than that. What would motivate a nice guy like me to do this to someone? Think, Barry, think. Sometimes it causes severe emotional trauma. What kind of trauma can make people snap? Death of a child, loss of a job, abandonment? Oh, I get it. What about infidelity? Many men have been driven to extremes by their wife betraying them. Many seek revenge, pain and sorrow for all involved. And the collateral damage, the divorce, the loss of children, it just gets uglier and uglier. Isn't that right, Barry? Any comment? Really? Nothing. I stopped and laughed. Oops, silly me, let me help you. I ripped the gag off, taking off a bit of his scalp. There, now we can talk like civilized people. Your turn, Barry. I've monopolized the conversation enough, haven't I? Talk, asshole! I practically shouted at him for the last time. He was sobbing. I'm sorry, but she came up to me and I... The slap sounded in the night. I leaned back in my chair and sighed. Well, that's it, Barry. Pick one. If you don't, I'll probably do the whole thing to you. Oops, I forgot one. I picked up more papers. My oldest son is a lawyer. These are attachment alienation suits, legal in this state. One for me, one for Mr. Jeffries, and one for Mr. Grant. Mrs. Oliver is a widow, but she's named as a witness. You can pick one if you want. I'll go have a beer while you're thinking. I'd offer you one, but I want you to have a clear head. I'll be back soon, and you'd better give me an answer. I walked off into the darkness, found a log, and listened to the night. An owl hooted quite close by. Coyotes could be heard howling on the ridge. Tree frogs sang in chorus on the wet ground, addressing the night. It was peaceful. When I returned, he was lying on his back, apparently screaming. I shook him roughly. What's it going to be, Barry? I've got a couple of favorites myself. I hope you'll refuse to pick one so I can have some fun. He begged. I yawned. Time's up, Barry. I'll enjoy it. You probably won't as much. I picked up the ball bander. I guess it won't hurt for long. Let me know, okay? You want to see it? Well, maybe it's for the best. I pulled a leather mask out of my bag and strapped it over his head, leaving only his nose exposed. I replaced the castrating tape with a regular strong rubber band. I heard him scream. It would be uncomfortable, but it wouldn't do any lasting damage if it was removed within 24 hours. I pulled out a vial of pills. They were estrogen pills left over from the hormone replacement therapy my soon-to-be ex-wife just had to have to make her skin look younger. The worst it would do was make his pecs ache for a day or two and probably raise his mood swings. I pulled out a bottle of water and put 5 pills in my hand. I unzipped the zipper on his mask and clamped his nose shut. He opened his mouth to scream, but I shoved the pills down and shoved the water bottle down his throat. He choked and spit, but eventually swallowed. I was humming to myself when I heard a voice come out of the darkness. "That's enough, Dad. I think you've made your point. We'll figure this out on our own." All 4 of my children came into the world with one son-in-law and one daughter-in-law. "How do you know that?" I asked in surprise. Mel laughed. "You're so predictable. From the beginning, I had 2 people watching you. I wanted to stop you early, but I got a majority vote. They wanted you to have some fun. You're a scary person, you know that? Go home. You have other problems to deal with. We have one." I bowed to their wisdom and left. To aftermath. I called Sandy right after I hit Barry, telling her I couldn't wait any longer and had to leave. I actually had an appointment, but I was late and called to cancel it. She didn't know where he might be. He came home 4 hours later. The police brought him in. He claimed he had been forcibly put into a car, robbed, beaten, and left on the side of the road. As events unfolded, the police firmly believed it was a disgruntled husband or group of husbands. I had a half-baked alibi that the police easily believed. My wife was unconscious and could not tell me exactly when I got home. I will never forget her scream the next morning when she went to take a shower. I had an intricate tattoo on my privates that proudly read, "Barry's Slut." It wasn't a real tattoo, but one drawn with ink that tattoo artists experimented with. It was guaranteed to last 3 months. It was used for people who weren't sure they wanted a real one. If they chickened out, the ink would come off and there would be no harm done. My sister-in-law was beyond suspicion. Many witnesses saw her and the rest of the family eating lunch at a local diner. Hypothetically, it could have been a fellow artist who was moving out of town and could use a little extra money. Just a wild guess. I was on my way out the door on a short vacation when she screamed out, leaving pictures and a no-fault divorce decree on the dining room table with a note saying I would help her get settled in an apartment and pay her expenses for 3 months while she looked for a job, or if she didn't sign, and I would leave her out in the cold after a very public divorce. She signed. She lived across town for a while, then met and married a man 4 years younger than her, but I guess a relationship with an older man wasn't too good for her. They moved to Alaska right after the ceremony. I laughed when I heard she passionately hated the cold weather. I never asked why she decided to cheat. In fact, I never spoke to her again. The lawyers sorted it all out. The pictures appeared in various mailboxes in the neighborhood. Sandy kicked Barry out and he went to an unknown destination, right in front of Mr. Jeffries and Mr. Grant. After the dust settled, I asked Mel to track him down to file divorce papers and set up child support. I'd heard he was having a hard time paying the proper amount of support and living a decent life, but as long as he was paying, no one cared. I unofficially adopted Sandy as another child, really giving her a shoulder to cry on. I talked to Mr. Oliver and got the terms of her mortgage renegotiated. He was very sympathetic. So sympathetic that 11 months later, I kept the boys with me while they were on their honeymoon. His wedding gift to her was a paid-off bill for her house. 2 years later, the boys had a younger sister. Mr. Jeffries divorced his wife, as did Mr. Grant. Mrs. Jeffries moved across town and spent the next 3 years trying to reconcile. Finally, he spoke to her, and she returned to the neighborhood. They had not yet remarried. Mrs. Grant had nowhere to go since she was out of state. I saw her walking down the road with a single suitcase and crying. I felt responsible, so I drove her home and put her in the spare bedroom. She took over my household, keeping it clean. Turns out she had a good head for business, so now she also manages the home office. I bought us a gym membership, and while I was lifting, she lost over 100 pounds in weight. She became very attractive. Men crowded around her until she made it clear that she didn't need another partner. The one she had was fine. After she lost the first 50 pounds, she surprised me by waking me up in the middle of the night, bouncing on my bed. "I think this will pass," she said. "What the hell are you talking about?" It took me a second to realize she was naked. Weight test. I'd wanted to do this forever, but I was afraid the bed wouldn't hold both of us. Now move over. I always sleep on my right side. She still does. My kids thought it was a riot when she announced at Thanksgiving dinner that we were going to start a family. I tried to talk her out of it, but she said I was about 6 weeks too late. I did the right thing and married her. All 4 of my children had long conversations with her about my views on fidelity. I think it may have scared her. Turns out her husband was cheating on her and she was doing it purely out of revenge. Unfortunately, thanks to me, he had proof and she didn't. Our daughter was born about 3 days before my 5th grandchild. My 58th birthday was 10 days away. I realized I would be 80 when she graduated from college. The kids had recently thrown a Halloween party and insisted we come. It was a horror-themed affair. I had a fake axe and a hockey mask, my beautiful wife dressed as Elvira, and she had the body for it. The only thing scary was how sexy she was. My sister-in-law, the tattoo artist, was wearing a tea-suit and carrying a briefcase. The other kids wanted to know who she was. "I am my father-in-law. He's the scariest man I've ever met," she said. She won first prize for her costume.